Hi, I'm Lou Ann Hunt, and welcome to the April edition of Lynchburg 360. We're here at the Kemper Street train station, where this month the famous 611 train will be bringing hundreds of visitors to the Hill City. And if you're a steam fan or simply want to learn more about Virginia's rail history, there's no better place to go than the Transportation Museum in Roanoke. Let's head over there now for this month's Day Tripper segment.
Well, tell me a little bit about the history of the museum itself. It's founded in an old, or it's located now in an old freight depot, is that right?
It is. This is the Transportation Museum, the Virginia Museum of Transportation, is located in the old freight depot for Norfolk and Western. And it's probably about 100 years old, and but it's a wonderful, huge facility, and we've repurposed it for the museum.
And that's a neat repurposing of an old building specifically for this purpose too. I mean, it's nice to save a building like this, but to save it and house this kind of collection is
exactly.
Also pretty neat.
To save this building and use it for what it's being used for, it's just perfect, absolutely perfect, and it's got a wonderful old history.
Yeah. Roanoke, an obvious choice to place the Transportation Museum, given the rail history here.
Roanoke, it was, of course, the hub of the Norfolk and Western Railroad for many, many years. I grew up here, and I remember the steam engines when I was a young boy, back and forth. And so having this here and having the steam engines here just speaks volumes to the heritage of Roanoke and to the people in Roanoke that built those steam engines.
What can people expect to see when they come to the museum?
We have different sections of the museum. We have a car museum for car enthusiasts that has some really interesting cars. We recently got a race car from Virginia Tech that Richard Petty Enterprises had given to Tech to do research with, and they painted it in Virginia Tech colors, and it was the number 43 car that Bobby Labonte drove in 2007, and it is fully operational. Haven't started it up yet. That would be fun, but it is fully operational. So the car museum has some really old cars. There's a car that was built in Lynchburg back in the early 1900s that's out there, and so that's pretty interesting. Didn't have any idea until I got here that there were cars that were built in Lynchburg. We have an aviation gallery that we talk about the history of flight in the area, and interview. There's some video interviews of some of the early aviators in the Roanoke Valley and how the whole Roanoke Valley grew aviation-wise. And we have some wonderful old engines, jet engines and piston engines that are on display here. We have a bus museum. That you wouldn't think about having a bus museum, but this has a gentleman named Harry Mesmer was a bus driver for Greyhound, and he has collected bus memorabilia, and so we have a whole section there for buses. And then, of course, we have the rail yard with trains, and we have the 1218 out there, which is a huge locomotive. We have the 2156 out there, which was a great locomotive. All of these were built. N&W was sort of unique in that they built their own. They built their own locomotives, and so they designed them and they built them. And of course, the great example is the 611, and the 611 is up and running and on the tracks.
How big of an accomplishment is that to have the 611 up and running again?
The 611 was an enormous accomplishment. It is the last of the J-class engines, steam engines, and there were 13 or 14 built. Anyway, there were several built, and the 611 is the only one that survives. And so the 611 is right now We're getting ready to start spring excursions, several of which will be going to Lynchburg from Roanoke. There is one from Spencer, North Carolina to Roanoke as well. So, and they begin in April and go through June. And the June ones will be up in Manassas, Virginia. But having it back on the tracks is just, it was a huge undertaking. They took it completely apart, all and down to the boiler, and went through it, and everything has been refurbed or replaced on it. They even had to manufacture some parts. And to see it back up and running again is just amazing. It's an amazing locomotive.
What is it about the age of steam that evokes so much memories and fond memories for people?
I don't really know. When I think of it, I think of, I had an aunt that lived in Cincinnati, and we would go down to what is now the Winston Link Museum and put her on the Powhatan era, which went from Roanoke to Cincinnati, and it was pulled by one of the J-class engines. And I remember the hustle and bustle of the luggage being moved around. As a little boy, they were pushing carts past me with luggage on it, and of course the steam from the engine up at the front and all. And there's a romance about it that you just don't get with a diesel. It was just and it was a wonderful time, and the conductor, all aboard, screaming all aboard and everything while people boarded the train. And then as it pulled out, that wonderful chugging noise of the pistons and the steam. It just, I don't know, there's a lot of romance to it, I think. It's a big accomplishment. It's a wonderful way to preserve the history of Roanoke and Lynchburg and the surrounding area with the 611.
Sounds like there's something for just about anybody here.
There really is. Here at the museum, children, there's plenty here for children to do. Older individuals who might remember the steam engines, I think it'll be a wonderful time for them. People enjoy airplanes, model railroading, which is behind me. We have a little bit of everything here. It's just a great place to come and be with your family, or just by yourself if you want to reflect on some of the older days here in Roanoke.
Definitely worth the trip of an hour or so over.
Absolutely worth the trip from Lynchburg. It really is. It's a wonderful place. I just love it.
Many folks are aware of the importance of the Pierce Street Renaissance District to Lynchburg's history. In these two blocks lived a world-famous poet and a pioneer in aviation, among others. How their stories fit into the bigger picture of African American history is the subject of a new book from former local columnist Darrell Laurant called Inspiration Street. Steve Smallshaw caught up with him at a book signing. Let's learn more.
Well, tell me where the inspiration for Inspiration Street came from.
Well, over the years, writing the column, I would do stories on these people from time to time, Ann Spencer, Chauncey, and it didn't occur to me until later that these people all grew up in the same block, and it just sort of blew me away. And nobody had ever written a book about all of them together. There's a book written, there's a number of books about Ann Spencer. Chauncey Spencer wrote his own book. And there was a book about Ota Benga, and that came out last year. Actually, it was very good. But nobody had ever put them all together. And I just, I felt like there was sort of an underlying theme. So, when I retired from the paper, I had more time to write, and this was, so I had a little more time to do research. It was a little hard because I was living in New York and trying to do it down in Lynchburg. So I had to do some of it on the phone. But a lot of these people I had talked to before. So.
How much easier did that make the job, knowing that you'd already talked to most of these folks before?
Oh, it was a lot easier. Yeah. I knew who they were, but I still didn't know. I mean, to me, they were sort of one-dimensional people. Like history makes people one-dimensional, and so I wanted to make them more like real people. And to do that, I had to talk to people who knew them and that sort of thing.
So tell me a little bit about the book itself. You sort of broke it into chapters dedicated to certain folks in certain time periods?
Well, it's most of what happened was around from the 20s to the 50s, I guess. And the thing of it was, this was during the period of segregation. And I think one of the themes that these were people who succeeded despite segregation. They were African American people, but they didn't let that get them down. And you know, for example, Ann Spencer, decades before Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat on a streetcar. But of course, there was no Martin Luther King around to spread the word and make her a symbol. So the only people who probably knew about it was her and the conductor, and you know,
right.
Anybody who was on that. So they were, you know, but they weren't civil rights people really. They just did their own thing. They didn't let it get them down.
So are these stories that maybe folks haven't heard? I mean, they might know some of the main bullet points about, you know, these historic figures, but this goes a little bit deeper and gets a little bit more personal.
Yeah, it does. Chauncey Spencer got caught up in the during the 1950s, you know, the communist hysteria and all that, and he lost his job. He was suspended because someone said he was a communist, and there was no basis at all. And he finally went to court and got his job back, but it took him a year. But he was an interesting character. There's a guy named Frank Trigg. Have you ever heard of him?
I don't believe I have.
Nobody's ever heard of Frank Trigg. He lived in the house that Walter Johnson later lived in. He was born a slave in the governor's mansion in Richmond because his parents worked for the governor. And when he was 13 years old, he lost his right arm. And they were still in a plant, you know, it was again, they were working in a plantation, but it was after slavery. And his boss, so to speak, said, well, you're not any good to be in the field, so I'm going to teach you how to do bookkeeping. And so he started, he sent him to school, and he wound up as the president of 3 colleges. And he lived in Walter Johnson's house.
It's just amazing when you think about it. The number of folks that came, like you said, from within such a small geographical area. Is there any other space in the United States that could probably lay claim to something like that?
The only thing I could think of, as far as, at least as far as African American stories, might be some parts of Harlem, possibly. But you know, and of course, all the people who came to visit Ann Spencer, it was just, she once said, this is mind-boggling, you know, even to me, these people. And you know, how this happened was W.E.B. Du Bois, he wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folks, and he became like this, you know, voice of the black community nationwide, one of the founders of the NAACP. He came to speak at Virginia Seminary, and he said, and he was a very fastidious kind of guy, you know, he liked to be called Dr. Du Bois, and he'd always dressed up and all that. And he said, I'd like to take a shower, you know, I've been on the road. Somebody came in with a basin of water, you know, a metal basin, and they said, here. And he said, that's unacceptable, you know, I can't, who has hot running water around here? And they said, well, the Spencers over on Pier Street do, you know, because Edward had put in hot running water and central heat back when that was just unheard. So he just went over there, and there's this knock on the door, and they open the door, and it's W.E.B. Du Bois, and he says, can I take a shower in your house? So they're like, sure, you know. Her husband was, they were very social. And when these people would come to town, they would tell all their friends, and they'd have a party, and then, come on over and meet, you know, Thurgood Marshall, come on over and meet, you know, whomever, and Paul Robeson, you know, whatever. But Martin Luther King made a special trip to see her, went to her house, and her poetry, if you read it, it has an undertone of social, you know, activism. She might be writing about a flower, but there's a double meaning, you know. But you know, she wrote over 1,000 poems, and only a few of them ever got published in her lifetime. Walter Johnson is known for teaching Arthur Ashe and Althea Gibson how to play tennis. What a lot of people don't realize is what really defined him as a teacher is there was a kid named Juan Farrow who lived next door, a little kid lived next door, and one day he was watching, you know, Arthur do their thing, and he said, and Walter Johnson says, hey, you want to come over and learn how to play tennis? And he goes, sure. Well, he ended up beating John McEnroe and playing in the Australian Open, you know, but that was, he was just a kid, you know, he wasn't anybody.
Do you feel like you've added to their biographies then in some way?
You know, I hope so. And I always say, you know, this is not the definitive book on these people, because really to do that would have taken years. And I didn't have that much time. I'm 68, so I'm trying to get some books written, you know. So this is just, yeah, an effort to make a little more dimension and get people interested in them. And, you know, I hope somebody does go and write another book. Or one of the things I'd like to do is I want to get this book out there in the larger world beyond Lynchburg, just because I think people need to know about these people. And nobody in Kansas City has ever heard of, you know,
Sure.
Ann Spencer or Chauncey. Ann Spencer maybe, but not any of the other people. This is kind of the African American history in microcosm, that's what I call it, you know, because these people represented, you know, and in the first chapter of the book I talked about how in their own way they all disputed or dispelled myths about black people, you know, but people have to know about that. I think it'd be great for kids who are growing up in kind of a disadvantaged place to realize that these were inner city people, you know. I mean, Pierce Street is the inner city. I mean, it's not bad. It's not like Chicago or something, but it's not. But that block is beautiful. I mean, the houses are, you know, really nicely kept up, and you know, it's like a little oasis in the middle of downtown Lynchburg, you know. And if they can do it, you know, anybody can do it.
Lynchburg is quickly becoming a city that enjoys many diverse cultures and traditions. And now you can celebrate all of them in one place at the end of this month. Here's Heather Brown to tell us more about the International Festival coming here to the Bluffwalk on April 30th.
I'm Heather Brown, and I work for the City of Lynchburg, and I'm a member of Action for Change, which is the City of Lynchburg's multicultural resource group. I'm here at the lovely Bluffwalk, which is in downtown Lynchburg, and we're here to talk about the city's International Festival. In 2014 and 2015, Action for Change hosted a multicultural fair just for City of Lynchburg employees. It was a great success, and we decided that we wanted the whole community to join in. So Action for Change invited a diverse group of stakeholders from the business community, education, restaurateurs, and community volunteers to help us plan an international festival for the whole City of Lynchburg. So on April 30th, you're going to get to experience Lynchburg's best international culture. We're going to have music from different cultures, we'll have exhibitors, we'll have vendors selling international wares, and the best of all, great international food. So Action for Change is the City of Lynchburg's multicultural resource group. We do a variety of programming for City of Lynchburg employees. So we've done the multicultural fair, we've done plays, we also do lots of workshops for our city employees to learn about other cultures and how to appreciate difference. You may not believe it, but the City of Lynchburg has a lot of diversity. We want this international festival to expose everybody to the wonderful multicultural community that we live in. So come on down on April 30th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and experience Lynchburg's International Festival.
That's it for this edition of Lynchburg 360. The days are getting warmer, the flowers are starting to bloom, so make sure you take some time this month to get outside and enjoy the view.